the Mark Twain Circle, and especially Judith for inviting me to be a part of this panel. As part of that invitation, I was asked to take a germ of an idea and turn it into several maybe smaller ideas with questions kind of attached to them without kind of fully completed theses. So I think I found myself in the territory a little bit when coming through my research here, building on an idea I had already developed in some capacity. But thanks to people like Jim Caron and Bruce Michelson, I was given some nice notes and inspiration for several ideas that I want to present here, kind of in brief. But first, I just want to start with kind of the central idea here of Mark Twain and belonging. When I think about Mark Twain and belonging, I always return to what Huck Finn recognizes when he says, quote, "There weren't no home like a raft after all. Other places do seem so cramped up and smothery, but a raft don't. You feel mighty free and easy and comfortable." Expressed here is the basic dynamic of belonging, represented by the relationship between the shore and the river, where we feel uncomfortable, where we feel at ease, the people who don't know us and the people who do. James Greenaway, in his philosophy of belonging, identifies this characteristic as metaxy, or the state of being in tension. He then defines the essential tension of belonging as movement between what he calls existence from and existence toward. Existence from relates to those people, places, and feelings that comprise who we are, but from which we've been separated. It's homesickness in its broadest sense. Existence toward, on the other hand, describes the goods we desire, the where or with whom we want to be. Together, these positions situate the human person as always in between, causing tension because it means one can never truly reach a defined end or gain satisfaction with their current status. Therefore, the essential tension of our belonging is that it can never fully resolve. Yet, it remains a fundamental motivating force behind our search for things like identity, for home, for purpose, and for fulfillment. The importance for understanding belonging in our current moment cannot be understated. More than just feelings associated with contentment or acceptance, belonging can go a long way toward helping us better navigate the tensions between what we want and what we do to achieve those ends, especially as a political community. I believe that Mark Twain offers us a unique opportunity to explore belonging in relation to the American experience specifically. As a consummate American, some would say the American, Twain represents an apt figure for studying American belonging, especially in light of his remarkably resilient place among the idols of the American imagination. So the broad question here is, what does Twain's resilient Americanness help us recognize about both his and our understanding of what it means to belong in and even to America? In part, my study of this subject takes its cue from Michael Kiskis, who claimed that the force behind Twain's life and work arose from the domestic sphere of family and home. In charting a new course for scholarship, he urged readers to, quote, "face the reality at the heart of Twain's stories, that pain is at the center of home and grows out of the search for home." A defining feature of which, Kiskis states, shows up in Twain's character's, quote, "inability to negotiate human relationships." These difficulties and concerns may be more relevant than ever, especially in what appears to be the rapid degradation of communal values, morals, and truths. These are the same fears that Hannah Arendt identified with the growth of the totalitarian state in the mid-20th century, and what Toni Morrison expressed much later when she said that, quote, "the destiny of the 21st century will be shaped by the possibility or the collapse of a shareable world." I'd like to take Kiskis' observations a step further, though, and build on his conclusion that, quote, "ultimately Twain's work recounts the struggle of the human heart to find a place in this world, to find peace, to find a home." I think we can identify this struggle more precisely as the struggle to belong, which includes matters like identity, nationality, and spirituality, along with the domestic concerns of home and family. And at the core of all of these issues rests the pain that Kiskis draws our attention to, a pain Twain knew quite well. While the loneliness that Twain's characters so often experience typically gains the most critical focus, I believe it's only a symptom of this pain. It's what Huck experiences when he repeatedly says, quote, "I felt so lonesome, I most wished I was dead." It's the same condition that Twain writes about near the end of his own life in The Death of Jean, that in his empty house he, quote, "must wander the silences where there is a dumb sense that something has been lost that will never be found again, yet must be sought, if only for the employment the useless seeking gives." I believe that we can find the source of this pain succinctly expressed in Twain's Diaries of Adam and Eve. The postscript at Eve's graveside reads, quote, "Wheresoever she was, there was Eden," an adaptation of telegrams and letters he sent following Olivia's death. Quote, "I am as one who wanders and has lost his way. I am a man without a country. Wherever Livy was, that was my country." All of this pain, I argue, is the same. It's an acute sense of the lack that occupies a presence of absence in our minds and stirs our longing for belonging, the being in tension with a something lost or never gained, a feeling of homelessness and vacancy. Namely, it's the pain generated by the tension that comes from the universal condition of exile. Exile from loved ones, from home, from innocence, memory, from the places of our belonging, followed by the impulse to cleave ourselves to something, anything, to avoid the loneliness that follows. For Huck, that's joining the community of the dead or lighting out for the territory. For Mark Twain, in this case, it's using nostalgia to construct a new Eden. Ultimately, I think Twain's experience and characters point to a common characteristic among his life and work, one that signals his response to his own belonging as well as his perspective toward many of the problems facing America in his time. While critics have argued that Twain's most effective moral observations come from his successfully imagining and writing as the other, the outcast, and the marginal, I contend that this tendency isn't just a narrative strategy or keen imaginative verisimilitude, but the actual source of his perspective from the very start. That is, Twain writes about and through the other because he already recognizes himself as such. Whether it's the American Vandal, or the outcast Huck Finn, or the interlopers Tom Canty and Edward Tudor, the time-traveling Hank Morgan, the mysterious stranger, or any of the unfamiliar visitors in his short stories, Twain repeatedly centers the perspective in one considered other. He understood that exile makes us outsiders, even sometimes in our own homes, and we can spend an entire lifetime seeking to allay the pain of that status or denying it altogether. Therefore, the moral insight of his outsider perspective is the recognition of one's own otherness, the ways in which one does not belong, and an awareness that, as Toni Morrison states, quote, "There are no strangers, there are only versions of ourselves. For the stranger is not foreign, she is random, not alien, but remembered." Much of the pain of the outsider's exile from the home he desires directly relates to the difficulty with navigating human relationships that Kiskis identifies. For Twain's outsider characters, this social dynamic often manifests in communities that have become habituated to an ethic of separation, the result of collective ignorance and self-alienation, and which sees the outsider longing for a new ethic of co-being along with a restored will to belong. They're faced with overcoming the difficulties of these relationships if they want to achieve their ends at all, an overcoming that promises the deeper relational knowledge necessary to share experience together, and therefore make meaning out of the collective exile they participate in. This pattern is what we see in part in Huck's developing honesty with Jim while on the river, and in Adam's discovery of Eve's goodness outside of the garden. If there's a solution in these narratives to the kind of societal alienation that Twain recognized, it certainly involves an active cooperative relationship to the world, in which the outsider moves from what Mikhail Bakhtin calls a monological perspective toward one that is dialogical, itself another iteration of the existence from and existence toward dynamic. This shift emphasizes a shared experience of the world and looks forward to belonging as its end. It requires not just the recognition of one's own outsiderness, but also the understanding that that condition occasions the possibility for intimacy with another. And rather than denoting irreconcilable differences that force one to wander into the territory alone, this outsider status can be a source of generative power that can help people construct meaning and build collective homes. So now I want to look at a couple of ways that we might apply this broader idea to Twain's life and work. I want to begin with the question that probably strikes us first when we consider belonging. Where does one belong? For now, let's just focus on the most straightforward answer. One belongs at home. For all his homes, I think most observers would agree that Hartford is where Sam Clemens most satisfyingly eased the tension of belonging, where living in between actually felt the most comfortable, where his outsiderness was welcome, and where navigating human relationships was the most fulfilling. But how all of this coalesced in one space is a less apparent matter. As some Twain scholars have argued, the Hartford years came during a period when the American societal landscape was undergoing major transformations. With these transformations came changes to popular notions about the American home and family, which began to de-center long-held domestic ideals. If we then look at the Clemens family in Hartford within the context of these large societal shifts, I think we can better understand what differentiates them from many of their social contemporaries and how their choices helped produce belonging amidst this seeming chaos and instability of these national changes. Perhaps one of the starker contrasts we can draw is between Nook Farm in Hartford and Fifth Avenue in New York. Many of these differences and the larger social dynamics at play were manifest in the homes each of these residents kept. As many architectural historians have noted, the eclectic domestic architecture of the Gilded Age, with its lack of formal unity, was a sign of a people looking to assert control and permanence over social, political, and technological shifts. For Fifth Avenue residents, this meant carefully crafting homes to facilitate their self-conceptions and to instantiate their wealth, power, and influence, to show their neighbors and society at large just how successful and aristocratic they could be, especially in a country where ambition and achievement were proof of one's freedom, and generational security imitated the control of an aristocracy it lacked. For example, the 1878 William K. and Alva Vanderbilt mansion, also called Petit Chateau, represented the sheer ambition of its time. According to a Vanderbilt relative, Alva, quote, wanted a weapon, a house she could use as a battering ram to crash through the gates of society. And she decorated the home with European opulence after, quote, pillaging the ancient homes of impoverished nobility. The house would be a glaring contrast to the urban architecture around it, which left one critic commenting that the chateau-style mansion was displaced, disoriented, and unnatural in this setting. It therefore demanded attention in ways its neighbors' homes could not. Even still, many of the Gilded Age homes of Fifth Avenue didn't simply help their owners show that they belonged in society, they helped them stand above it. The Clemens family took a different route. Though opulent in its own right, we can envision their home in Hartford as a modest counter to the kinds of political displays of power on Fifth Avenue. Sam's comments about the home before it was even built are a testament to the principles the family desired to live by. Famously, in a letter to Mary Fairbanks, he remarked, quote, my future wife wants me to be surrounded by a good moral and religious atmosphere, and so she likes the idea of living in Hartford. We could make more money elsewhere, but neither of us are much fired with a mania for money getting. That is a matter of second-rate, even third-rate importance with us, regardless of what he does later. Later, months before moving into his new home, he wrote to Fairbanks' daughter, Molly, that, quote, in a word, one may make the house a gaudy and unrestful palace of sham, or he can make it a home, a refuge, a place where the eye is satisfied, the intellect stimulated, the spirit broadened, the soul surcharged with peace. Statements like these perhaps underscore the Clemens' distaste for the homes and lives of their Gilded Age contemporaries outside of Hartford, and their own lives testify to that fact. Much of the Clemens' home and community life in Hartford were influenced by ideas of domesticity and communal living, many of which came directly from Harriet Beecher Stowe and her guides to domestic science. As Kenneth Andrews puts it in his study of Nook Farm, quote, "The community devoted its combined imagination to making congeniality a way of life. It cultivated specific ideals, universally acceptable concepts of family happiness, of hospitality, of varied, intelligent, and fresh recreation, of continuous cultural self-improvement, and of material comfort, to live a rich life and a happy one, and to prefer in their homes informality, comfort, and spaciousness over richness of gingerbread." While the homes of Fifth Avenue during construction and private events became spectacles for the public and were carefully followed by newspaper stories as if to document narratives of their exclusivity, in Nook Farm, the public enjoyed the hospitality of the Clemens home. In fact, this ideal is captured by the brass plate above the library fireplace, inscribed with a quote that Sam Clemens didn't really like, from Ralph Waldo Emerson, that reads, quote, "The ornament of a house is the friends who frequent it." The Clemens family life, too, shows a distinct reaction to the evolutions of their time, especially in terms of their principled ideas of reform. Rather than practicing the social ambition of Fifth Avenue, they saw family as an end in itself and desired to cultivate their own interests and enjoy one another. Though conventional and conservative in many ways, an observer today might comment on how modern the Clemens family life looks. This trend is noted by urban sociologists like Ernest Burgess, who have posited that the American family around the turn of the century, around the end of the 19th century, began to exhibit new characteristics, a development that saw a gradual shift away from the institutional family and its subordination to law, aristocratic custom, rigid etiquette, status, and the fulfillment of social and economic functions, think Fifth Avenue, toward a more democratic familial order, with its focus on individualism, companionship, consensus, and personal happiness. This should remind us of the Clemens home. Taken together, the Clemens Hartford home and their life there serves as a kind of living social critique of their Gilded Age contemporaries. The Clemens rejected the standard extravagant displays of wealth and power that so consumed the likes of Fifth Avenue in favor of trying to cultivate moral, intellectual, and communal virtue, to live a genuinely happy life. They did so at least for a little while, and their efforts yielded a period of authentic contentment where home, family, and friends were the center of their personal cosmos, and where they found a legitimate sense of belonging, a sense that eventually made leaving Hartford behind so difficult and guilt-ridden for Sam, and which served as the backdrop for his future nostalgia and endless longing for home. Now I want to turn to what a new application, what might be the next logical question in this series: who gets to belong? I want to briefly look at another perennial American issue, immigration, and how Twain's thinking and writing about the matter fit into the contemporary and historical discourse on the subject. In 1883, the Brooklyn Art Association hosted an auction titled "An Art Loan Exhibition in Behalf of the Fund for the Pedestal to the Bartholdi Statue." In case you're unfamiliar, that statue is the Statue of Liberty. In an effort to secure the remaining capital needed to construct the pedestal, the American Committee for the Statue of Liberty organized this exhibition to auction off art and literary works. The committee solicited contributions from a number of artists, and among the contributors was Emma Lazarus, who, after some convincing, wrote and donated her famous sonnet, "The New Colossus." The poem was the first entry at the exhibit and was reproduced in the exhibit's catalog for 2 years. In 1903, a bronze plaque with the New Colossus would be displayed in the pedestal, and it remains there today. For seemingly most Americans, the Statue of Liberty calls to mind this Lazarus poem. Many of us are familiar with its word. Mother of exiles, from her beacon hand glows worldwide welcome. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden door. These lines have led many to associate Lady Liberty with imagination and immigration and its relation to the American dream, as the poem speaks to the promise and opportunity of America, only possible because of its commitment to the proposition that all men are created equal. Like Lazarus, Mark Twain was asked to contribute a work for the fundraiser. In the end, however, he was less convinced by the idea and sent the compilers a piece titled, "Why a Statue of Liberty When We Have Adam?" In it, Twain complains that we don't need a statue of something we already have, liberty, which he claims America possesses, quote, in its wildest sublimity. Instead, we should have a statue to something we've lost, i.e. Adam, his old standby. However, he writes that if we must have a Statue of Liberty, then he'd like to suggest an alternative depiction. Quote, but suppose your statue represented her old, bent, clothed in rags, downcast, shamefaced, with the insults and humiliation of 6,000 years, imploring a crust and all hours rest for God's sake at our back door. That's the aspect of her which we need to be reminded of lest we forget it. He remarks that America has given this aged outcast a home, and a good one too. In fact, Twain even implies that this is the first home Liberty ever had. Despite the tenor of these exaggerated pronouncements, I think there's a subtle earnestness in his assessment. Twain's depiction of liberty here suggests two ideas. The first is that liberty is an outcast foreign to America. The second is that America has become her home. His image of the old begging liberty and his comments that we need to be reminded of her as such, lest we forget it, emphasize this rendering of liberty as an immigrant welcome into America. Even without knowledge of the Lazarus poem, Twain hits on the same theme, but his contains an implied critique that centers on America's responsibility to provide a secure dwelling for liberty, knowing that her 6,000-year history is one of exile and that she may return if her hosts lapse in their duty. This depiction of America's relationship to the immigrant squares with Twain's other satires on immigration. In his 1870 epistolary short story, Goldsmith's Friend Abroad Again, a Chinese immigrant to America writes a series of letters home to his friends in China in which he consistently repeats his belief that America is, quote, perfectly free and perfectly equal. Despite abuse and imprisonment, he writes, quote, but still my faith in the universal liberty that America accords and defends and my deep veneration for the land that offered all distressed outcasts a home and protection was strong within me, and I said to myself that it would all come out right yet. Of course, it does not turn out all right, which brings home Twain's critique of America's insincere dedication to the principles of liberty, freedom, and equality it insists are essential to American prosperity. Together with his piece on the Statue of Liberty, Twain appears to align himself with a kind of creedal nationalism similar to what Abraham Lincoln advanced when he claimed that America was a nation, quote, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men were created equal. This notion serves as a contrast to recent public officials who argue that the Statue of Liberty has nothing to do with immigration and that belief in national creed is too abstract and over-inclusive to be a marker of American identity. Notably, however, Twain departs from Lincoln's nation conceived in liberty by situating America as prior to liberty, rather than birthed from her. This formulation portrays liberty then as a choice and one that ought to be actively maintained. It's a choice to be welcoming and hospitable, without which liberty could not survive and belong in America. Therefore, Twain's association of liberty with the immigrant suggests a link between the way America treats immigrants, the relative status of liberty at home, and the definition of what it means to be American. In other words, America's claim to liberty at least partly depends on its continued refuge to the outcast and exile, and only in fulfilling that obligation can one rightly call themselves an American. Ultimately, Twain's identification with the outcast and outsider, his writing as the other, the foreigner, and his praise of the principles behind the American project all suggest that he maintained an idea that America belonging was not inherited or dependent on external features, on blood and soil, but was the product of a shared commitment to providing a hospitable environment for liberty. So for Twain, the question.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, let me take that.
The question of who gets to belong in America rests on whether or not America performs its duty to its own ideals, because America is a land of exiles who have only found refuge because they were willing to build a home where refuge was possible. Thank you.
Thank you.